We're going to call this meeting to order. My name is Joe McGivern, Chairman of the Holyoke City Council Finance Committee. Sitting to my left is City Councilor at Large Jim Leahy. To my immediate right, City Councilor at Large Mike Sullivan. Next to Mike is City Councilor at Large Peter Tallman. We're also joined by Councilor Dave Bartley, Ward 3, and Councilor Lyndon Bacon from Ward 5. Our president, who's also a member of this committee, Todd McGee, will be joining us shortly. He's coming from work he was out in Connecticut today. We have with us a number of speakers and a few items that all pertain to the middle school project. Tonight, just a reminder, we have had a number of meetings on the middle school project, as has a building committee, a design building committee with the school department about the building of 2 middle schools. The City Council has exercised their responsibility and twice voted for the appropriations to allow design and study go forward on this project. The project has been, somewhat to its stage presented to the City Council, and we are ready and hopeful to go forward. But many city councilors have said that with caution, recognizing the funding of this very important project, but the funding of this project is a key to being able to go forward. There are different options, there are different schools of thought. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to meet with a number of people that have an interest and a stake in this, and to be able to try to find some common ground, or at least try to find some direction for which our mayor, will eventually, point us towards the funding of the project itself. So with that in mind, before we get to our guest and before we get to everybody, we're going to ask Mayor Morse to open up with the few remarks about the middle school project and where we are, and then we'll get right into the agenda.
Great. Well, good evening. Thank you, Councilor McGivern and the members of the Finance Committee, all city councilors. Thank our guests for being here. Thank you, Cinder, Sandy, other department heads. Also want to give a big thanks to the members of the School Building Committee who've been working really hard for months and months of meetings to talk about this project. Our project manager, Margaret Wood, and her team, thank her, and all the members of the school committee that have been working in this process along with us over the last year or so. Also thank the staff and the team at the Holyoke School Department for working with us on it. Again, as you said, Councilor McGivern, the council has been updated every step of the way. Thank the council again for their votes of the appropriation to help move the schematic design forward a couple of months ago. That has allowed us to get a better picture. We're still in that process. And as I said at previous meetings, and I'm very passionate about this, I think this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for the city of Holyoke. We haven't had a new building constructed in the city since 1989, so nearly 30 years ago, and I think it's time that Holyoke gets its fair share of investment from the Mass School Building Authority. It's also an unprecedented step. Typically, communities get one school approved at a time, and through our fierce advocacy over the last several months and working with the MSBA, we were able to convince the agency to approve 2 brand new middle schools construction happening simultaneously, which of course provided the city with some efficiencies and lower costs rather than staggering the construction of the 2 schools. And some folks have asked, well, why not stagger those in terms of financial forecasting? And really it's about equity for all students, no matter where you live in the city of Holyoke. So as you know, one of the proposed middle schools would replace where Peck Middle School is now, and the other middle school would be constructed in the downtown area of the city on the Chestnut lots next to the current Lawrence School. And so we feel strongly that every student, every middle school student in the city should have an opportunity to go through one of 2 state-of-the-art middle schools in our community. And so a lot of work has brought us to this point today. The obvious question tonight, and as I said a couple of months ago, I would never put the council in a position where you have to take a vote to finance this project or provide avenues for the residents to finance this project without having all of your questions answered by me or my administration or by our outside financial advisors. And so tonight our hope is that councilors will have an opportunity to ask questions about the financing, the different options. I've stated my intentions very openly and transparently that I think the only means to make this project happen is through a debt exclusion vote. When I looked at the cost of these projects, even with the MSBA reimbursement, in looking at obviously our operating budget, the general fund budget, and other obligations that we have, I feel like a debt exclusion is really our only avenue to make this happen. And I also think in terms of the way I view these types of projects anyway, I don't think, even if we could fit it into a traditional bonding mechanism, I do think it's worthy that the people of the city of Holyoke, the taxpayers themselves, can have a voice and vote as to whether or not they'd like to see some of their tax dollars invested directly into building new middle schools. I think this would have a positive impact on the quality of life in our community. It would have a positive impact on our property values, and of course, most importantly, make sure that all of our young people have access to a high-class education and institutions in this city. And so again, tonight, I welcome our guests to have a conversation, and again, thank the council for providing the venue to have this discussion tonight.
Thank you, Mayor. And just to note that there were several members of I say building committee, the old name, but this economic design committee and the committee that worked with the school department on both the design, the proposal, and now development, including our councilor Mike Sullivan, who's been joining the committee. We have Rory Casey, Whitney Anderson from the schools, Anthony Soto, and who am I missing? School committee, Lori, our purchasing director.
Devin's the chair.
Devin Sheehan representing the school committee. We also have a number of members of the school committee that have joined us this evening. We welcome you. Our new auditor and our training auditor, existing, longtime acting auditor, has joined us also, and we look forward to a healthy discussion. We also have the project manager, Margaret Woods, is here. She's been with us on a couple occasions already, and we thank her. But as I said, tonight's about beginning the discussion on funding. I think the City Council has more or less adopted the concept of not just one middle school, but two middle schools. And later on, we're going to talk about the schools, if the projects do go forward, the closing of two schools, which will be a cost savings in some areas, and possible that we may be able to translate some savings or some money towards the paying of the project itself. With that in mind, though, I think the most important part of tonight's evening is not only do we have our city treasurer here joined by our auditors, the auditing team, but we have our bond counsel and longtime financial advisor. I met Cinder, I want to blow it, Cinder McNeary. Close. I won't tell you, what year did you graduate high school, Alex?
2007, Joe.
Yeah, I met Cinder in 1989, I believe, 1990.
That was the year I was born, Joe, 89,
But Cinder is here to make a presentation, but also to talk, and more important, to answer a lot of questions. She is joined by Abby Jeffers, and as I noted, our treasurer, our elected treasurer, Sandy Smith, is with us this evening also. So Cinder, if I could turn the mic over to you, we welcome some remarks, and then if you could entertain our questions, that'd be great.
Just push the button. Yeah.
Right here. So my name is Cinder McNerney. I'm Managing Director at Hilltop Securities in Boston, and we serve as financial advisor to the city, and I've been working with the city, embarrassed to say, since 1973.
Here I was born.
I know. I shouldn't have said that, but it's true. Anyway, we don't have an opinion as to whether or not the city should do these schools. I mean, we generally don't say, oh, yeah, you ought to do this. This makes sense. But what we do is to assist the city if it decides for itself it wants to do the schools with how to structure the debt and show you the different kinds of options. I mean, from the perspective, I want to qualify what I just said, though, because when you see a city like Holyoke and what the mayor said in terms of the idea of if the city were to do two new schools, it's the same with all the cities at this point. And especially where it does have an impact on the value of the property and on the willingness of investors to invest in the city if the city is investing in itself. So, I mean, that's just sort of a standard. So I do, from that perspective, support everything I heard that the mayor said, we can't imagine, frankly, how the city could, looking at the city's budget, how close you are to you're at your maximum levy limit, the lower levy limit under Prop 2.5, and you're not very far away from the primary levy limit. We can't imagine how you could, you look what happened a year ago in the city's effort to close $1 million budget gap. The debt service on this bond over 30 years would be, once it kicks in, and we've showed a debt model that would push the debt out, but it does make the assumption that both schools would be built at the same time. But once the debt service is in full swing on a bond issue for, say, 28 years with 2 years of short-term notes to push it out some, you're talking about debt service, principal plus interest, of $3.7 million a year. That's more than the existing debt service in the general fund of the city annually. So it's hard to imagine how you could do that at the same time as you've got other competing, you will have other competing pressures on the general fund budget. I know that there are ways that perhaps you could consider, raising the sewer rate. That would provide you about 1.7 million, I understand, that could support, that the city general fund would no longer have to support the sewer budget. It could instead support debt service 1.7 million a year. So that's one thought. However, if you do free up that money, what else might you want to use it for besides debt service on a school? One of the easiest debt exclusion purposes is school construction because it's generally supported by the community. Nobody wants to support the sewer plant particularly. They would prefer to support education and school construction. The only thing you can go over the primary levy limit for right now is is debt service. You can't go over it for an operating override. You have to live within the primary levy limit for your budget operations, your annual expenses. You could exclude existing debt and you could exclude new debt service. And that would free up money also. But the debt exclusion is really the only opportunity to produce more tax revenue when you're constrained by new growth or the lack of new growth. My understanding is the city hasn't been able to grow the full 2.5% annually like some surrounding municipalities out in this part of the state and further west. One of the things when I look at the cost of the debt exclusion, on a $200,000 home, we're talking about $270 a month. Basically I think it's $1.35 per $1,000 of assessed value. That's on a monthly basis, that $270 per year. I think I must pay that for my Comcast bill on a monthly basis. I mean, well, if you divide it by 12, it's less than $25 a month to support $50 million worth of, to support $50 million.
I'm sorry, did you say it was
worth of
$270 a
schools.
year or per month?
Per year.
Okay, per year, okay.
Yeah, the impact of a $50 million debt exclusion amortized, paid back over 28 years, is for a $200,000 home is $270 a year. Divided in 12 is $23 a month. What do we get for $23? I mean, if you get 2 new schools. I have also heard some discussion about amortizing this over a longer period of time. Right now, the state law only allows construction bonds for any purpose to go out for 30 years. And if you use short-term debt, it cuts into that maximum term. What we've been seeing, and we've helped numerous municipalities issue and structure school construction debt, is that to go out 30 years doesn't provide you with interest rates the way they are and the yield curve the way it is, a whole lot of budgetary relief, the annual cost of the debt service versus 25 years. I've heard some discussion about going out 40 or 50 years with this. That will cost you more than 30-year debt. So there's really no advantage to trying to go out past that, at least not in this market condition, and you'd have to get special legislation for something like that. You could, like the mayor said, if you sell a school, you could use those sale proceeds, and if there's no debt associated with the school that you sell, because if there is, you have to pay off that, you have to apply the sale proceeds first to that debt service. But if there isn't, you could take the proceeds from that sale and use it to reduce how many bonds you sell. You could not do both schools at the exact same time, but I'm hearing that that's not really what it sounds like is the preference. So, the biggest opportunity is to That's basically, I don't have much more to say than that because, I guess I will add, I don't think drawing on your stabilization funds is an option. And the reason I say that is because currently the city is rated A+. That sounds like it's a pretty good rating. It starts at AAA, and then there's AA, and then there's A. But in Massachusetts, almost everybody is in the middle of the AA category, which would be a AA2, and or a straight AA. There's AA minus, AA, and AA plus. Then there's a straight AAA. The city's an A+. That's a notch below the AA. Typically, we use an enhancement, whether it's insurance or a state program, to allow the city to access a state bond rating or an insurance bond rating, so it can access the market at a fee as a higher credit with added security on top of the city's underlying credit. The reason the city is rated at least the A+ right now is because of the stabilization fund balance and because of the conservative nature of the city, that you basically haven't drawn on it. You've lived within very constrained means for quite a while now. And we are definitely of the opinion that if you draw down on that, I mean, 12 million with debt service on the 50 million school construction bonds right now, the way it looks, at a $50 million cost, debt service is $3.7 million a year. You've only got $13 million of stabilization funds. I don't know that's what it was at June 30, 17. I'm not quite sure what it is right now. Is it at 18? That wouldn't last you very long on a 30-year bond. So, one of the biggest opportunities I think that you have is both the debt exclusion and a serious discussion about the sewer subsidy from the general fund to the sewer fund. I mean, what's going on with that? I mean, the city needs to help itself so that you can build some flexibility to do other kinds of things besides just have what reserve you need stuck in a stabilization fund, because if you draw on it and don't replenish it immediately, you're going to deteriorate your rating, and it's only going to cost you more to do any debt, whether it's this debt at some point or other debt. So I guess, from that perspective, when we looked at this, the first model we ran, we just made the assumption ourselves without anybody even talking to us that, this would have to be a debt exclusion. There's no other option. Because there's very little flexibility in your budget now. I know you're getting a multi-year operating forecast, and does it include a capital plan of some sort? Capital needs, anyway? By working with the compact with the Collins Center. When we see what that looks like, that would be interesting to, consider, all of your options if you've got any, but what are the demands on the operating budget besides future debt service?
Cinder, for the people at home, because I know a lot of people are watching, can you just explain what a debt exclusion vote is?
It's where so right now, there's a primary levy limit in Massachusetts and a secondary levy limit. Prop 2.5 went through in November 1980, and it constrained you to an aggregate commercial and real estate property tax of $25 per thousand. Your aggregate is somewhere just south of there between residential and commercial, even though your commercial is higher and your residential is around $20. $25 per thousand is the primary levy limit. You can't go above that in taxing anybody without a debt exclusion. You can't go above it to operate the city. You can only go above it for debt service on bonds. And the maximum, but you're also constrained because in 1980, when that went through, most municipalities, including Holyoke, I think, had to cut back 15% a year until it got to a $25 tax bill. Subsequent to that, there's been more state aid that's been distributed. There's been more growth, but not so much in this part of the state. And what's happened, you were allowed to increase your annual levy as new growth happened, and by 2.5% a year plus new growth. So now we're 30 years after Prop 2.5 went through, and the city is right up against that lower levy limit by growing 2.5% a year, not even, because there hasn't been enough new growth, and you don't get it, you don't get so much state aid, and you're just under the primary. So you can go up to the primary levy limit with an operating override by going above that lower levy limit, which for some dumb reason is called the maximum levy limit, which is lower than the primary levy limit, so you're so close. So let's just say you're at What's the tax rate for residential right now? It's $19, I think, $20. Okay, you could go above that right now under the lower levy limit by like $10,000. I don't know if some of the lower levy limit has been expanded a little bit by not taxing as much as you could have, but that's what the state says you can tax without an operating override. With an operating override, as of fiscal 18, you could have taxed another $1 million, but you'd have to get the population, the residents, you'd have to have a referendum on that, and you could tax another $1 million. With the debt exclusion, where this debt on $50 million of debt is $3.7 million, you could go over and above that $1 million and tax it. Doesn't mean over and above your lower levy limit. You can go up over the primary levy limit with debt service.
Yeah.
So the debt service first would tap into, I think you could go over the primary levy limit with that. I'm sorry it's so complicated. I think very few people understand exactly the ins and outs of how the different levy limits work simultaneously. But you're very constrained by this situation. I know that there's prospective legislation that might try to address it for communities to pick up, to be allowed to pick up new growth in different ways, but that hasn't gone anywhere yet. There might be an open ear at the legislature.
Our city assessor, chief assessor is here, Tony DeLude. You met him earlier. And I think just for everybody here, when you say the lower levy limit and the primary levy limit, I believe the primary levy limit is what we call the ceiling.
Correct.
And we've actually hit the ceiling, but we lost, as I told you, we lost our second largest taxpayer when the Mount Tom coal plant was closed a few years back. And so it's not just it's a combination of the lack of new growth, but the lack of being able to take advantage of new growth when we do have it, because we're still trying to make up some ground. Tony's here. I know Tony's been listening. I don't know if you wanted to add anything or if you had any questions for him, but I think you have a good handle on the numbers.
You know that single tax rate at the city.
You got to turn that on.
20. Yeah.
We know it, right now, the single tax rate is at $25. So, as Cinder said, that's, we're right at our top limit right now as we speak. The only good news was that values this year were pushed up, and I believe it's like 1.2 extra million in revenue from last year. So last year we're at 195,000, and this year it'll be about 1.49 million in levy money that we can collect this year through real estate.
Is that under the primary levy limit?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
The ceiling.
Yep. Yep.
So,
Yeah. Go ahead, Cinder.
but even with that, you would need to, excuse me, can you just elaborate? Could you tax that without any kind of an override or?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so you could-
Our values have increased
And
significantly.
are you going to do that?
Well, we're finalizing free cash right now, and the decision to balance the budget will be based on the votes from the city council.
So one of the things is, and I know this is not, I think probably I said unpopular things last time I was here, because coming from outside the city, I would suggest that you think about the future of the city and the vision that the city has for itself, and tax as much as you can right now that you're allowed to tax and without having to go to the voter. And I would consider, as you develop the plan, using the debt exclusion for the school construction project, you need to build some flexibility and capacity for the city to take advantage of different kinds of things that might come your way. Otherwise, you're going to lose it. I mean, the city needs to, where everybody, people and cities everywhere are under pressure to reinvent themselves all the time, and you can't do it without building some capacity for yourself. So, for example, right now, if you can tax more money than you're necessarily plan to spend, you could tax it and set it aside as some kind of as cash to contribute to reduce the amount of the debt exclusion. Or you could tax it and set it aside so that you can draw on it to offset the impact of the debt service in the upfront years, or to use it for that purpose on something like a debt exclusion, so that you could provide some relief here or there, or figure out what the best use of something like that is, rather than leave it on the table. If you leave it on the table, it's left on the table forever. And when you're in the situation where you are with such a low tax, do people complain about their taxes? Because it seems like there's a very low tax burden here.
Could you say that one more time, please?
Well,
People complain about their taxes.
I just think that, I'm not sure what the average assessed value of the house is here.
I told you a higher number than it actually is. It's 180.
Single families are 190 right now.
Okay, so at 200,000, which is what I was using as an estimate before, it seems to me, and you tell me, but it seems to me that $270 a year for $50 million worth of school construction isn't very much. And we ran that number, did we use 5%? I think we did. Yeah, we used 5% on 30-year debt, and that's still good. We assumed that the debt wouldn't be issued until 2023. You'd start building it sooner, but you'd use short-term notes. 5% right now on 30-year debt, which is what we did in the first place. I think we showed right out the gate, you just sell $50 million. And you take advantage of current rates, which 30-year debt would probably be, 4.25. So there's room for rates to go up, and you'd still be under the 5% if you push it out as far as you can. But if you amassed money between now and 2023 when the debt was issued by taxing yourselves, if you had $1.5 million and you weren't taxing it this year, or you did tax it this year, and you taxed the same $1.5 million, you didn't need it for operations. You did that this year and next year and the next couple of years. It's only 19 right now. You'd have 4 years of $1.5 million. You would have, and if you sell a school, you might be able to lower this, and the tax debt exclusion cost could be lower. Those are some options that could come down the road as you really start to fine tune this, and as the city takes a good hard look at what the Collins Center produces for the city in terms of both capital needs and a financial forecast that goes out, I don't know, they probably go out 10 years with that.
Just a note, our city council president, member of the committee, Tom McGee, has joined us, as I said earlier. And Senator, are you ready for questions?
Sure.
Okay. Councilor Sullivan.
Okay, thanks. Hi, Cinder.
Hi.
First, I'd like to go back to the option on a 40 or even 50-year instead of a 30-year. So initially you said state law mandated 30.
It doesn't mandate, but that's the maximum you can sell construction debt for right now.
Right now. And the reason I keep questioning the having a longer term is right now we're sitting with Holyoke High, which is just turning 50 years old, I believe, this year. Talking with the people in charge of the school facilities and stuff like that, we've probably got another 50 years. It seems to me, when you're a homeowner, you're allowed an option. You can get a 15-year mortgage, a 25, a 30, or even a 40-year mortgage. So I've heard the arguments about passing too much debt to future generations, but these schools are going to be around for 50 more years. Why are we trying to pay for it in 30? So if the only hurdle is that we have to get something, legislation, home rule petition or whatever it is, what other reasons would we not want to do that? I mean, just on my basic math, it would take the 3.7 million probably down to annual number of around 2.2 million.
I'm not sure how you did your basic math, because that's not what it does. It actually
That's what I meant,
increases.
yeah.
No, it would increase it. So you're paying 3.7 million right now. If you go out 40 years or 50 years, you're going to pay 4 million and 4.5 million. It's got diminishing returns. At a certain point, the reason why people stretch out debt is because they pay less. But at a certain point, based on what's going on with the yield curve and with the time, it starts to not provide any kind of budgetary relief. We've been, so this last year, we probably originate, 50 school construction bonds a year. That's the big project, the purpose project that's taking place these days. And there's very few communities that have even chosen to go 30. A lot of the communities that have any capacity are going 20 years because of the savings. of dollars. Now, a lot of people say, okay, well, if we think that interest rates are going up, why not sell debt as long as possible, because we'll pay back more debt later with cheaper dollars. And that's why a lot of communities have chosen, well, I'm going to go with 30, but it's still providing some budgetary relief. When we've looked at some 30-year debt schedules with different scenarios in different market conditions over the course of last year, and 30 years provided almost no advantage from a budgetary perspective. Let's say $50 for the average homeowner on a $2,000 hit or something like that on a big $100 million. And meanwhile, it was costing millions extra over the 30-year term. So you'd think that mortgages would go out. I mean, not mortgages, that debt could go out 40 and 50 years. I think when issuers are going out that far, they don't care that it costs more. They're doing it for other reasons, because they're borrowing so much that I'm not sure why they're doing that. And I don't think this market works that way. But you could try to get special legislation, but we've not been seeing that. We've seen almost everybody choose at least, rather than 30, 25 years. And some have gone to 20, which is mind-boggling to me, because they've been big projects. And I could start listing off all the different communities that have done that. And they've done it because when you look at the math, that, it's costing you more dollars, and it's not saving you any money from a budget year to budget year.
Okay.
So
We've talked about what the cost is to the homeowner, which is about $1.30, $1.35 per thousand in valuation. But right now, we have a business community that has the highest tax rate in the state. And we're pushing $40, and correct, on my math on that one, I think we're coming up with a $2.50 increase to the business community as well.
Well, you're raising an important point. I mean, I really think that, you might want to start with this sewer business, get it off the general fund, and get back to looking at what the general fund can do relative to that split tax rate. And if you need to really have it so like that, if you provided more capacity for the general fund, you might have more ability to. I mean, my own community backed off the commercial rate a little bit, but that doesn't mean, I don't think, that you throw out the baby with the bathwater here on the debt exclusion for the schools you're thinking about. The problem with waiting is the schools will probably become more expensive. So by waiting, and interest rates will probably be higher. So you've got the problem. The only thing that you can do that really does provide you some relief is to save before you need to spend it, and to amass more money. Maybe you do that with the sewer, with the sewer money, and to use the short-term notes, which might get you into a higher interest rate environment, but use the short-term notes, which don't pay principal, they only pay interest until you convert it to bonds. So if you use a short-term note, that's why on the latest run we showed it with less impact right out the gate, and that's because we're using 2 years of notes and working the cash flow that would be coming in with the MSBA reimbursement. So Margaret gave us the cash flow projections that exist right now, and we put those into a part of the model, and then showed how much, if you got reimbursed every 2 months on the expenditure requirements, the 60% coming from the state, that you, or whatever the percent is, that you would, how much you needed to borrow in short-term bands, and brought it on as slow as we could based on those constructions. Now, if the construction got slower, the plan would change again, and it would push things out a little bit farther. But if you push things out too far, you're going to, in terms of the expenditure and the building of the projects, your costs are likely going to be higher. As it is, the bond rate you'd lock in is probably going to be closer to 5, would be the assumption right now in 2023.
Okay,
So we ran it at 5.
Now on our bond rating and the rainy day fund, what you've mentioned several times how that affects our rating and how well we've done with it, but at what point do we have enough in there? What is there a certain number?
You've got enough in there now as a percent of your budget. You want to maintain that percent as you go forward, not just a fixed dollar amount, but you want to have the same percentage going forward.
Well,
As
that
at a
percentage has
minimum.
been going up year over year over year. Is there a certain percentage that they look for? Is it 5%, 7.5%, 10% of what the city budget is?
They look at different numbers. If you look at the last credit report, they basically expect the city to maintain, maintain where it's at, basically, going forward. They look at, it's different for each community. If the city had a wealthier tax base and wealthier demographics, then it could get away with having less reserves, frankly. The way the city's going to get itself out of this A+ position, which I think that it wants to, I think that any city in Massachusetts right now, any municipality should try to get to the AA category and do whatever it has to do to even be in the lowest of the AA category. I think, and there's a lot of communities in the state that don't have a lot of capacity, but they're at AA. And they're considered, the poorest communities in the state. And I think that the AA says something about how management is managing itself, how they're not in terms of what their policies are, and they're following policies and adhering to them. They've thought through what policies make sense. Is the Collins Center developing policies also with the city, or looking at the policies, fiscal policies of the city?
I don't think the Collins Center is. I know our outside auditors examine policies and
Yeah.
work with us on new policies.
So the fiscal, there's different fiscal policies that would, the way that the rating works is the management is 20% of the score, 30% of the score is the economy, the local economy, and the reliance on state aid, the state economy and the local economy. Another 30% is the financial results. Only 10% is your debt profile. So it's not like you're issuing and you've got very low debt, but your debt profile includes your unfunded pension and your unfunded OPEB. And then 10% is the state law, which dictates what you can and can't do as a municipality.
And I would just add to that, the 2 points, the 2 things we're working on with the Collins Center are 2 specific things that Moody's has identified in the rating calls and the rating reports, the long-range financial forecast and the capital planning. So we imagine when we finish those and produce those documents, we'll see a positive impact on the score, hopefully.
Yep. And once you complete those 2 things, the city can visit its policies relative to financial reserves and really establish, what's the right amount of reserves to have. But you can't just raid the stabilization fund. And it doesn't get you very far. It wouldn't even get you 3 years of debt service. then you've got 0. So then at that point, you would become very low rated.
No, I'm not talking about rating the stabilization fund.
Yeah, okay.
I'm saying, right now, at what point do we need to stop building the stabilization fund? At what point is there enough in it? And
I think there's
we can use what it spins off every year, when it has a good year, for other purposes, instead of just plowing it back into the stabilization fund. When is there enough in the pot?
Well, that depends on your policy. So your policy has to get developed to consider why would you use stabilization?
To give you an example, one of the things one of our stabilization use policies is an ability to potentially use interest earned every year towards capital projects. So that's an example.
So direct capital outlay, which is actually a very positive thing from the perspective of the rating agencies, that there's something, that there is, ongoing, that part of the debt policy includes a pay-as-you-go component. So, but, you might, in terms of the stabilization fund, obviously you would use it if you had an emergency, and then you would put it back in there, have to figure out how to get it back in there, so.
I've got that, but my point is 10% of the city budget, is that a good number to have in the stabilization fund?
I don't think it's enough for, what is the percentage right now? It's 13 million as a percent of the budget is, what's the percent right now your stabilization fund is?
It's probably 10, 11%.
Yeah, so that's a good percent right now. That's pretty good. The rating agency is happy. So if you maintain that going forward, without other things that would undermine that and need to be further mitigated by more reserve position, then that's probably okay. to be in the AA category, Moody's, but you're right now, we're pretty much working with the S&P rating, is, they always say that they wouldn't put you in the AA category without 10%. But there's a lot of municipalities now that have 15 and 20%, and they're saving it for different purposes, including, that, some have created education stabilization funds for debt service for exactly that reason. So there's, if you had excess, there's the consideration as to whether or not you use it for, OPEB, or whether or not you use it for education stabilization fund or debt exclusion stabilization fund, something like that. You could do something like that if you're concerned about that. I mean, if the high school has to be replaced at some point down the road and you're at your primary levy limit, you're not going to have much choice if you want to do it as a city, except for to exclude the existing debt that's already on your books that's not debt excluded in the general fund. That's what you would be, that's another option down the road. But we're kind of jumping the gun there on that debt exclusion. But, that's the only option for municipalities under Prop 2.5. If they reach the ceiling, is to start excluding debt, both prospective and existing debt service. That's the only thing that's the only option short of changing Prop 2.5, and that's been pretty tough to do. Well, raising, you can start to free up what you're doing if you're subsidizing something like sewer or whatever.
If I could jump in for a quick second, all related. We have Anthony Soda with us from the school department, and Dr. Zreich and Anthony are playing tag, I believe. Anthony, could you, and I apologize if this is, but if you could, Anthony, just on item number 3, which is the school department prepare a summary of the potential savings for additional costs associated with the 2 middle schools, with the, whatever it might be, the closing of other schools, or, operation cost, or the potential sale of buildings of schools that might be closed. And Cinder, one of the things we were wondering, I think you touched on this a little bit, is if we did sell a building, could we take the proceeds from the sale and put it towards the bond or put it towards the costs? But what do we have out there, Anthony?
So what we have, what we've looked into is we took a look at the buildings that we currently have that would be closing if we had to build these new schools. And I guess I'll cut to the chase and give you the big number. So the big number that the school department would save is estimated to be around $3.5 million. A lot of that, I don't want to get into the whole net school spending discussion, because I think we've beat up that conversation in these chambers for a while. So a lot of that would be avoiding, if we continue to have $2 to $4 million budget cuts every year, it would definitely relieve a lot of that pressure. Or it would allow us to reinvest that money into the classroom and offer more programming for our students. $600,000 of that is operational savings. So we got Peck and Lawrence and Metcalf that they're not really energy efficient buildings. So when we do build these new schools, they would be a lot more energy efficient, and we'd be taking some buildings offline as well. Transportation is something, though, that we believe we'll be able to reduce our transportation budget if we're taking all these middle school students who are spread out across the city and consolidating them into 2 buildings. We believe we can consolidate roughly 6 routes, hopefully. I mean, we did it based on a point in time, so the kids' addresses where they are now is probably going to be different in 5 years, but that would save the city $500,000 that could go towards, and that's recurring savings as well. So that is one big number that I thought would be helpful for the council. And then a large part of it is staffing savings. So right now we're operating 13 schools and 11 buildings. If you relocate down or downsize to 9 buildings, you'd be reducing your maintenance staff, you'd probably reducing administrator staff. We staff buildings based on the number of students, and we try to use target ratios. And there's some efficiency in bringing all those kids together and sticking to our regular staffing ratios that we operate with. So with all that said, we are looking at a $3.5 million savings. Another big part that I thought would be part of the city savings is if we do keep these older buildings, as you guys recall, we we have to regularly invest in, we did boilers at Ian White and Morgan. We just brought forward a window and door and roof project, or window door project for Kelly, Sullivan, and Morgan. And those, although we're getting 80% reimbursement with those accelerated repair projects, those come with, additional bonding and debt payments. And if we keep Peck, if we keep Lawrence, it's only a matter of time before we have to start looking at replacing the boilers, replacing the roof, replacing the windows. And if as part of this project, if we don't have those older buildings and we have 2 state-of-the-art buildings, we don't have to worry about those costs for a very long time. And those costs usually come from the city, through bonding. We've been able to take advantage of the MSBA match, but definitely there's a portion that the city kicks in.
Anthony, Peck would be demolished, so there's no resale value there. Lawrence, there might be some resale value, but probably not for a number of reasons. Is Metcalf something that might close?
Metcalf is part of the plans to close, yes.
Because I know Counselor Sullivan's looking for a retirement apartment, and
Yeah.
this might be some potential there, Mr. Mayor. No?
I suggested that at the last meeting, yeah.
And I didn't include in my numbers like what would happen to those buildings. So I don't know what the intended use would be of the older buildings, but it's not included in the numbers that I just provided.
And currently, I think part of what we're looking at is our middle school age students would be removed from existing elementary schools, which a lot of them are K through 8, and therefore there'd be less demand for the classroom in each school. Therefore, we can do less schools, and these savings will become part of the formula. Is that summing it up?
Yeah, we have there's also a middle school at the Dean campus right now, so that would, our thoughts would be every single middle schooler would be in one of these 2 buildings.
Okay.
Yeah, it'd be moving away from the K through 8 model and also open more space at the current K through 8 schools to do more pre-kindergarten for families here in the district.
And not for tonight, but more preschool slots would be great.
Absolutely. That's definitely part of our plan.
Senator, does this work into anything in terms of what you've been talking to us about? Closing schools, savings, and it all sounds good. Does it help us out, or are there any options we can?
No, it definitely helps. I think the city needs to look at everything it wants to try to accomplish and figure out where it wants to put the dollars. Like you just said, but if the school needs more money, or if you want a preschool or whatever to have more, to be expanded in some way, or you have other debt needs, you really have to put the whole picture together, and you've got time to plan that and develop a plan and put it on paper. And it depends on when you get back the Collins reports on operations and on capital needs, and take a look at the timing as to when that would be done and what's feasible, and put it on paper. It may be that, you have to look at both the revenue side of your equation and the expenditure side, and then decide how much of this debt can we even do under the ceiling? Or do we have to put it all out there and let the public decide if they want these things or don't? And, like I said earlier, one of the best bets is relative to school, because you've got that whole segment of the population that really supports the school and wants that to get done, as opposed to, like I said, the trash compactor. Who's going to, that might have to be paid for with the spillover from the Stabilization Fund. And you need to develop a very detailed plan going forward. It's hard to do that, but you're really at this crossroads, it sounds like to me, where you need to put this on paper as to, look, each year we're going to have, maybe we have freed up money from transportation or from operating the schools, but the schools have other kinds of needs, and we want to try to do something to attract people to these schools or whatever. You've got other kinds of conflicting pressures, and it might become more apparent. If you sell a facility, or you sell the land under a facility, because you've got, even if a school comes down, is the land then for sale? Is there a value of the land? But you could, if there's no debt owed on whatever it is that's going to be closed, then I think you could decide or, have the school department, I don't know who owns those, if it's the school department or the city, but we could decide to apply that to reduce the cost of these schools. And even if you do a debt exclusion, it doesn't mean that you have to exclude all of it, but I don't know why you wouldn't. But, we've got some municipalities that do a debt exclusion, and then they're kind of second guessing whether or not they want to exclude it all. You don't.
You don't want to go over that last thought about the schools own them as long as they're being used for a school purpose.
Okay, yeah.
We don't get into that, right, Dennis?
So I understand. So I think you just need to look at the whole picture and how you want to apply whatever resources you've got and how you can develop more resources, and whether or not the public would be willing to do a debt exclusion.
Councilor Bartley.
Yeah, hi, thanks, Chairman, and always a great job, Joe, putting all this together. I know it's a lot of work getting all these. Cinder, I'm David Bartley. I'm the Ward 3 City Councilor. Nice to make your acquaintance, and Abby, welcome. Cinder, just before I start, you mentioned your community is making some change. What may I say? What community you hail from? May I ask?
I live in Swampscott.
You live in Swampscott. Okay, thank you. All right. I think is the governor from Swampscott?
He is.
He is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hasn't helped us much yet.
It hasn't helped much. No. Okay.
think
No.
so.
Well, we'll leave that for another topic when you're at the select board meeting in Swampscott. Yep. And I really appreciate everybody's comments and everybody's participation. I think we've got a room full of advocates here, just with the city's interest in at best. I just want to make a couple of comments, if I could, Cinder. I just want to reiterate your comments regarding the Stabilization Fund. One of the things we prevented last year was a proposal to use the Stabilization Fund to provide raises to employees. Those of us, and we only, we need one third of the board to stop that vote, so you need 2/3 to pass it. I forgot what the vote was, but it wasn't a majority. Well, we didn't have a majority at that time, but we had enough votes to stop using stabilization for raises. One of the things that I suggested at the last finance meeting was to get a capital budget, a capital plan going. And I suggested at the time that I would be warm to using interest from the stabilization account to put towards a capital budget. And I heard you say tonight that that would be looked upon favorably as a city looking to reinvest in itself. So that's something, and I'm reiterating these things just for the finance committee and the other counselors and the executive here. So that's what I heard you say. I'm not going to address anyone else's comments because I respect everyone in this room to the utmost degree. My comments would just be ticky-tack, but I just want to just emphasize a couple of points you made. One of the things you emphasized is planning. Planning. You said there are communities that, in fact, set aside debt exclusion for even buildings. This community has done no such thing at any time. And here we are with a worthy plan to build 2 new schools, or even 1 school. It's a worthy plan. To a person, we agree with that. It's admirable. But the plan just started, Cinder. This was not thought about 10 years ago. This was not prepared for 5 years ago. This was, I think, started a year ago. So now we have this sail between the sill and the Charbitus. Do we want to do a debt exclusion where we jack everybody's taxes up? Now, your 276 is different than my 276 in Swampscott compared to Holyoke, so let's not pretend that they're comparable communities, because they're not. What we will say is that we've have a choice to try to do it out in a long-term debt. I heard what you say. Of course, that's a horrible idea, and of course you pay. I don't mean horrible. No offense, but relative to paying for it now, it's much more expensive. We understand that. What is not before us at this point is, why do we have to have 2 schools? That's the only thing before us. Why don't we plan for 1 school for a year, a few years down the road, and then use our collective will to set aside funds for a second school 10 years down the road. But we don't have that in front of us. So the still in the short is this. We have, if we pass this, and I love it when we say, you know, we want to give everybody in the city a vote. If we pass it, the commercial rate goes up, Margaret, it's over $2. I don't remember what it is, but it's over $2. $2.50. $2 and change, which we're already number one or number two at $39.73. And we constantly get the Chamber of Commerce. So this year we didn't have anybody from the Chamber of Commerce come in, not one, during the tax classification. But we constantly get, if we go over 40, they're, you know, put the pin in the balloon. But this would be sailing past 41. And the residential tax rate at 1912, we're in sort of the, you know, the middle, I guess, amongst the 351. That would be another $1.25. I don't think I'm off by much by that. But that would put us certainly in the heavy residential. But that's with the two schools. We don't have a proposal for the one school. All we get is, you know, this has never been done before, and isn't this great? And why do we have to exclude one part of the city against another part of the community, the city? And, you know, why can't we get our fair, well, we never get our fair share from Boston. I mean, it's all rhetoric. But you're here to talk numbers. And one of the important things you mentioned is even our stabilization fund. We tout that, and we tout the 10%. We're not even in the middle. For rating, we're below average, is what you just said. We're below average. And that's despite all our votes to stop rating the stabilization fund. Thank goodness we stopped it, because we would be way below that. So, Cinder, and your first comment was you have no opinion on the schools, and I wrote that down, and I put a star next to it. And as well, you should. You know, you shouldn't. You're here for the numbers. But I want it to make clear, and it's not for you. I'm just addressing you, and I really should be addressing the chair, and I appreciate the chair's forbearance. This is through the chair to you. It's for the rest of us in this room that have to take the vote and have to pay the bill. At some point, that's going to come due. Now, I just finished on this last note. I think one of the many important things you said tonight was relative to the sewer fund. I confess, I've been in the let's hold on and figure it out. But that's only because it took us 4+ years to pass an ordinance that will allow the municipality to shut off water for non-payment of sewer. For 4 long years to get that done. It just passed last year, and now we're collecting data. And Cinder, wouldn't you know it, taxpayers are lining up to pay their sewer bill because they're getting the second shutoff notice. Not paid by December 1st, it's being turned off. So we are collecting more. And so those of us that didn't want to adjust the sewer rate wanted to at least get some data relative to sewer collections based upon the new ordinance. And the chair lady's here tonight for ordinance. She opened up a public hearing last night on sewer rates. And the thinking is that we'll probably have to adjust them, but I think taking the 1.7 off the books was going to help us tremendously. And so I heard what you said on that, and that's something that we've got to get on as a body. We've got to get our arms around. I would say even before we start passing debt exclusion bonds. And I realize that there's a timetable from Margaret, but I realize there's a timetable. And I believe February, I think, was a cutoff date, more or less. I don't want to put words in her mouth, but that's what I heard her say last time she was at the microphone. I'm not ready to even put this to a vote for the voters, to be frank, on this sole proposal, because it is a one-shot deal with 2 schools that I just think put so much burden on the commercial and residential tax rate. Again, we need 1989, I heard that. But where's the planning been from the school department for the last 30 years? Where's the planning been from, and this is no reflection on anybody here, but the city of Holyoke, the Board of Aldermen beforehand, the city council and the mayors, where's the planning been for, they knew it. It's really a tough vote, and I just wish there was a better way, but I really appreciate the chair's patience. I appreciate Councilor Sullivan's order to do this, because that's the reason we got you here. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Bartley. And before we start talking about, I think timing might be a way to wrap this up. Councilor Bacon, who did hold a public hearing, her committee last evening for the sewer rates, has a couple questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So one of the other discussions we've had, and thanks for coming down and giving us a very good overview. It's very helpful for me. One of the discussions we had was around the 80% state reimbursement, which you've heard referred to for projects such as boilers, et cetera. I, among some other of my colleagues, were distressed to hear that due to certain exclusions, the net state support for these two schools would really end up being around 57 to 60% because of certain exclusions in the calculation given economics within the city. And so there's a number of us who were more warm to the approach of trying to deal with that funding formula for at a minimum the second school, if not both, because that would save more than any waiting time would spend if we were able to increase by 20% the state support for these projects, which I understand in some projects we have enjoyed in the past. So that's one perspective that I bring to the table. I would like to see our state delegation advocating with our state legislators to accomplish this. We are in ordinance committee, as has been referenced, in a public hearing process to address the sewer rate now that the city did finally implement the collection rate, so that on an operational basis, we have a more sustainable operating practice going on. But what we're hearing, and this is early days in the public hearing, is that for the people paying the sewer rate, it would probably go up over $1 for the rate. So there's, the good news and the bad news, right? Because the same people who would be paying the bond exclusion are the same people paying the sewer rate that's now $1.25 more. And they're the same people whose home values just went up 10%, which, if the city is true to form, will tax it to the max. Okay, so they're going to get their increased tax bill based on their valuation, based on increased rate, along with their sewer rate increase. And I take your point, you want to get as much money as you can, but it's all coming from the business group that's been referenced and the homeowners who, and you may be surprised at this, but everything is relative, and they complain about their taxes probably in the same way that the people in the higher taxed communities do. So those are two of my concerns relative to this, but we are addressing the sewer issue, which I do understand is supposed to be a self-supporting fund. And since it was organized in that way, we are taking steps to accomplish that. That, as I understand it, would make about a $500,000 difference a year. I mean, if we're looking at this big picture, if we do all those things against the debt cost, the carrying cost of the debt that you've referenced. So that's the context I'm looking at it from. But based on the comments that you made about some communities setting up an educational stabilization fund or a debt stabilization fund, is there a way to set up these funds where they are binding so that, for example, say right now, our assessor has informed us that the values went up, so our levy limit has increased by $1.2 million. Is there a legal way to say that as the tax limit increases, we can in a binding way say to the extent that it exceeds $1 million, $1 million goes into here rather than going into general fund expenditures?
I think there's a way, I'm not sure exactly what it is, but I do think there's a way that you could segregate and appropriate money and set it aside for a particular purpose and have it be binding. I think there's a way. I'd have to check.
Okay, and I would appreciate understanding that more fully, and I would also appreciate understanding what the legal steps to accomplish that would be. Is it something the citizens have to vote on? Is it something the council can act on? Is it something the mayor needs to request of us? So,
I mean, you can create different stabilization funds there. I know that different municipalities have created special stabilization funds with special legislation, so I just have to check into it.
all right,
Yep.
that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Margaret, if we could impose upon you for a second. There's no, I think everybody understands that tonight is a fact-finding mission in trying to get us on some type of level playing field for the funding of the project itself. We certainly understand the project, and come on, the mayor's got a great mic right next to him. But where are we in terms of cost implications? What's going to happen next? Now, we're going to talk about a timetable in a second, and I know the mayor has some thoughts about what he wishes to do in terms of the next steps. But this, I've always called this Commonwealth of Massachusetts backwards when it comes to these types of projects. We put so much money up front, we do so much, and we don't know what the actual cost is going to be. And, we get so far down the road before we actually all of a sudden say, oh, wait a minute, we didn't think it was going to cost that, or I think you know what I'm leading to, but can you just update us where we are?
So I heard a couple of different things that I would like, I think it might be helpful to fill in some blanks about that I'm hearing. So one of them, how's that? So one of them, I want to address Councilor Bartley's question about why aren't we looking at two buildings separately? And to say that we actually did look at that as an option. And it is completely possible to do that. I mean, there could be one vote. There could be two votes. I think the issue that needs to be considered here, since it's the Finance Committee, is that the implication of that is that one of these projects, and obviously, these are substantial projects, if a second building was delayed, so for instance, if you built on what we're calling the Chestnut Street site next to H.B. Lawrence, and then you finish that, and then through a separate vote or as part of one vote, you built the second project kind of immediately in sequence, the big implication is escalation. So we're in a rising construction market, and we did look at this number because we think it's really critical to the discussion. And our estimate is that it would be about $1.7 million worth of escalation that the second project would acquire over that period of time. So, that's why I think the building committee, when sort of presented with that as an option, said, we think we want to put forward the most cost-effective version. And the issue is, and to speak to Linda's question about the delta between what the MSBA calls the base rate and what we call the effective rate. All that, what's driving that difference is how much you are over. The MSBA is caps as part of their legislation construction cost on a square foot basis. So I think right now it's at $333 a square foot. But these projects don't get built in this moment, right? They get built further out. And really, there are no projects. I think I heard about one today that's within the 333. I mean, most projects are outside of that. For every dollar you're outside of the cap on the square foot cost, that's all on the district. So, our job, and I say our job, it's myself as the OPM, the design team, the consultants working with the building committee, our job is to see how close we can get to the cap, right? Because it's the cap that's driving that delta. Every square foot that you build that's more than 333 is contributing to the difference between the 60 and 80%. That's the kind of key driver here. So if you delay the construction of the second building, or you know, maybe not delay is not the right word, but if you build them in sequence, all of that escalation is also not reimbursed. So you're actually you're going to take our estimated, you know, approximately 60% effective rate, and you're going to lower it when you do that. And so it's not a reason not to do it, and I think, you know, Councilor Bartley has certainly presented, you know, it would change how it would roll out, you know, year to year, but you would acquire additional costs. So that's why, it's not that that's off the table, but that's why this option was recommended. I want to speak to Councilor, to Linda's commentary about the effective versus the base rate. You know, I think it's honestly, I think it's a big issue. I'd really like to see communities come together and get it changed. I've had, you know, pretty significant headbutts with the MSBA on other projects. I mean, we've worked in Chelsea, we're working in Lawrence, we've worked in Springfield. I mean, we work in communities where this is like a huge issue. And I do think the legislation needs to be changed. But that's not a it's not a snap issue. I mean, you all know. And again, I sort of point back to the escalation issue. So you can sort of step back and say, well, we should change the legislation, and we should. But then for yourselves as a municipality, you're acquiring escalation as you do that. And, you know, the way we look at it is 3 to 4% a year on the cost of a project. So you can do the math on what that looks like. And then the schedule piece, which came up, I think just to give people a kind of overview of this, and I do have a schedule that I can send around if people would like to look at it. We're really, our whole proposal to the building committee was based on the idea that we wanted to get both of these buildings done and open for the fall of September 2022, which is totally doable. But I think that in order to do that, we need to have the cities, we need to make a big submittal in February, which is really going to nail down the basis of the funding agreement cost. So that's in mid-February. We would need, the MSBA would vote, I think, in May on their part of it, and the city would have, you know, 120 days, I think it is, after that, but it could be before that, to have the local funding vote. So I'm assuming that if the city council discusses this and decides they do want to have a vote, we would ideally want to be able to have a vote sometime, and I think we've tagged April as a good time, being before the end of the school year and at a time when, you know, it's sort of easier to kind of communicate with people. It's not the middle of the winter. And then we would launch into a design and bidding process following a pretty strict protocol that the MSBA establishes. So I hope that kind of gives kind of a picture of where we stand in terms of wanting to make this submittal. I think it's important. It would certainly be important, and I think the February date came up. I think the submittal is on February 19th. I wouldn't want to make a submittal to the MSBA without having the support of the city council. I'm not even sure I'm allowed to do that, but that's kind of, that's the point at which we're going to have to make a decision. Now, we can delay the submittal, but as you can imagine, it starts to push into the overall schedule, and it wouldn't make it impossible for us to meet the goal of September 2022, but it starts to impact it in a significant way, so.
Margaret,
Did I hit everything?
You did.
Okay.
And thank you. But just real quick on the, you told us on the formula, the construction capital, Councilor Bacon talked about the looking at 58% or so. We're in 80%. We're a gateway community. We're automatically 80%. But we're only going to get 58 because of the formula this year, 58, 59%.
Well, it's about the cap. Yeah.
This is the part that I can't understand. and Aaron Vega agrees with me, everybody I've talked to agrees with me, is we're 80%, but because we're 80%, we can't take advantage of those 5% items that some communities can who are not 80%.
Yeah, I nearly.
They can go above 60%, but we can't.
Yeah, I nearly got ejected from the MSBA board meeting when I was working on the Chelsea project because I was really adamant that was, I just thought it was completely unfair. What the staff will say.
My question is, you said legislation. Is it legislation
It is
or is it their
legislation.
policy?
No, it's legislation. It's written into the legislation. The incentive, this issue about the incentive points not being applicable if your reimbursement was already at the max is written into the legislation.
Our reimbursement, we can't get to the max.
I agree. To be honest, I think that when, I could be wrong about this, and actually Cinder might have an opinion. I think when the legislation was written, they didn't actually envision this issue about the cost of construction escalation, and there wasn't really a mechanism built into the legislation for that. And so it made a little more sense at the time, because, well, if you were going to get 80%, who cares if it's, 80% it's pretty good, right? But what's happened when they introduced this notion of this cap, it started to carve away at this, and this is where, to me, the real unfairness is introduced, is that then you can't get incentive points that wealthier communities can. So
We're joined by Dr. Zreich. We had a swap with Anthony Soto and Dr. Zreich, and I attended a forum not too long ago with almost all the members of the school committee. It's not just the cap and the formula and the squeeze. It's Chapter 70.
yes.
I haven't seen this for 30 years.
Oh, yeah.
But gateway communities who take care of the low-income population of the Commonwealth are getting squeezed again.
Yeah.
And we're not going to change the legislature. The last time it took a lawsuit to convince them what to do was right. They're not even looking at it right now. And it's time to wake up, Boston. It's time to wake up Beacon Hill and tell them to look at us. We didn't create poverty. We service poverty. We do so in the schools. We do so with our home environment, our available low-income housing, and we do so in a variety of ways as a community. And Beacon Hill is not looking at us the way they should be.
Well, and to be honest, I think, I'm not sure if the MSBA has really looked at this issue around the incentive points. I was kind of surprised myself when I did the analysis to see that the delta between, if you look at the kind of effective reimbursement rate across schools and you pull out the 80% communities, the delta in the effective reimbursement rate is, typically it's around, right now it's around 18%. When you pull out the 80% communities, it's more like 22, 23. I mean, to me, that delta is the incentive points. That's what you're seeing there. And honestly, I don't know if the MSBA has looked at it. It might be that if folks came to them and said, hey, look at this, they would get on board about, I think that the MSBA is fundamentally focused on equity, but they also have, their rule book is the legislation. So I don't think they're trying to be unfair. It's just that the MSBA staff is to enforce the legislation and to sort of be the vehicle for the
I'd be happy to
funds.
join you at one of their meetings and explain their unfairness to them.
I think there's a group forming, so, yeah.
Councilor Leahy has not said anything for a while, and he's asking me if he could follow up on that.
All right, thank you. Just thank everybody for coming along tonight. I greatly appreciate it. Joe kind of stole some of my thunder. I'm just talking about how, out of the 351 cities and towns, Holyoke steps up and we help out the people who come here, and we never turn anybody away. Dr. Zreich, who's sitting behind you, when we had the tragedy down in Puerto Rico, we didn't turn our back. We took in anybody that we can. How many people did we take in?
Took about 230 students.
230 students, and this is Holyoke. This is what we do, Holyoke Strong. We also take in homeless people. Our busing, Anthony took off. He had to go to a different meeting, but we still have a very high busing out of school district in the form of school choice. There's so many children that are going out of district, and that's costing us a lot of money as well. And we do have school choice coming into the district, which is good. And we have so many great programs. Dr. Strike and Mayor Morris and others started a great program with the dual language program. And I know Todd's child's in it. It's doing great. So we have a lot of positive things going. But I was just going to talk about the incentive points and how do we change that, because it's not fair. So we are thinking we're going to get 80%. Then we hear tonight it's lower than 60. Those base points. Every base point matters to a community like us. Mm-hmm. And so, how do we have our state rep or state senator file legislation? Are they in the middle of doing that? Like, what's the process for that?
Well, I can tell you, I had, we had Dory Brooks and I, who are the architect, and I had a pretty long meeting with Aaron Vega a couple of months ago to kind of fill him in about this, and I think he's keen to do something. Dory actually also worked on Joe Comerford's campaign, and I think Senator Comerford is actually very interested in this and filing legislation. So, I definitely think that there could be the coming together of a group of legislators to do something about this.
But how come it just seems like it's going along very slowly, or it hasn't happened yet?
Well, I think it needs an advocate.
But you said you've worked with Lawrence, Chelsea.
Yeah.
And do you think those people there would have started the ball rolling?
Well, I think the problem is the same thing happened there that is kind of happening here, in the sense that I think that this isn't broadly understood, and by the time a community is in the process, it's really hard to change it and affect your project. So you sort of see it in the rearview mirror, but there are certainly lots of communities that have built and will build again in the future that I think would come together.
All right, so in the communities that you've worked with, a lot of questions have come up with the amount of years of the debt service. What's the average amount of years that people or communities choose?
I have seen 20, and I have seen 30, and I don't think I've seen 25. But I think what Cinder presented is the range that I've seen, and it's definitely
amongst the 20 and 30.
Yeah.
And Cinder, if I could, thank you for coming as well. So if we go and we build these two schools, will that have a positive effect on our bonding rating? Or is that?
It would have a better effect on your bond rating if it was a debt exclusion than if it was adding pressure to the budget and it wasn't a debt exclusion somehow.
I don't think we would do it that way.
But I don't think it would be, I don't think it, in it of itself, it won't be anything that would move the rating.
No.
I think they would, understand that the city's investing instead of deferring infrastructure, and they're investing in the
I guess that's
infrastructure.
my question. It's kind of non-tangible.
It's seen as
Do
a
they look at
positive,
that?
yeah, it's seen as a positive to not defer infrastructure and to invest in your infrastructure to maintain it, repair it, and replace it. The debt exclusion is seen as a willingness on the part of the community to tax itself more to do exactly that, rather than to push it out into the future and not do it at all potentially. But no debt issue is going to change the rating.
Okay.
They're really looking at how you manage the city, how you plan ahead, how your financial performance, what's going on with the economics of the city, what's happening with pension and OPEB.
There's a lot. Okay, well, I appreciate it. Thank you, everyone.
Yep.
Councilor Tallman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Cindy, for coming down and give us a better picture, a clearer picture of what's happening here in our community and how we're going to invest in our future. And I think the biggest thing I took into this tonight was about you saying the planning of the future of the city, and try to tax more and try to get more income into the city. The Stabilization Fund, I think that's a huge thing. I saw the meeting last night. They're working on getting a handle on that, because that 1.7 million or whatever it is out there. That's something that is against us. So and it is a chance, a once in a lifetime chance to build two schools at one time. And I understand Councilor Bartley's point about doing one, why two, and the cost factor, what's going to go up later on. And it is a big chunk. And, even though it doesn't sound a lot for a lot of people, a lot of single income people, single home, elderly people that, that $270 could be a big hit for somebody. But hopefully, they'll see that the increase in maybe people coming to our community with the new schools, the students, people buying into homes, maybe increase in value of homes because of the two new schools, I think is key. But I really appreciate you and you coming down to really give us a better picture of what's going on to help us make a better decision, in the months to come, because this is really it's a groundbreaking time for our community, and it's something that's important. And the more knowledge we have on this issue for everybody involved is key. So I really thank you for your time.
I'd like to, can I add just something about that?
Sure.
I'm not insensitive to the tax impact for residents of the city of Holyoke, and it's all relative. I mean, I'm not sure who this counselor was, but he brought up my hometown. Our average tax bill is probably $8,500, and people are irate over the level of taxes. And we've deferred a lot of infrastructure. For 30 years, we didn't do anything. And so people that are living in my town in the last 10 years are doing everything. And people are really annoyed at this point. I mean, and the split with that, we're dealing with the same things. It might be at a different, socioeconomic factor, but it's the same thing. All the municipalities are dealing with the same thing. It's a balancing act, and it's really difficult. The way, municipalities are getting better organized and more sophisticated about managing their own affairs and looking forward at the future and how do we do this. One of the things I've learned about some of the school projects, and we don't get involved the way Margaret does with the MSBA, but we've seen communities where they didn't accept the school and they were wealthy, and they were told where they were going to get 50%. They were told, you're not getting a dime, you're going back on the back of the list, but you keep going back with the way Chapter 70 works. You keep going to the back of the list. There's no guarantee you'll ever get to the front of the list. They're taking on, they are wealthy, but people aren't happy about it in that town. In fact, this has created a big issue for them. They're going to go ahead and spend $100 million with absolutely zero reimbursement. And originally it was going to be $50 million. So their cost went from $50 million. They were arguing over one aspect of it. And the school building MSBA said, you know what? We're done with this. You didn't accept it on time. Now you're out. We're going to give it to more deserving communities or more communities that need the money more than you do. But now they're stuck with an extra $50 million price tag. I mean, we've seen, my town is in the middle of sort of feeling a little bit like, either take this or you're not going to get anything. You're going to go to the back of the list. And that's a little how, they operate, which is they come in, they evaluate what they think you need, what you should be doing. And, if you don't do it or you don't do it the way they want it, then you're going to pay all the additional cost, or you might go to the back of the line and you don't, the back of the line, you can keep being pushed to the back of the line. And because there's a lot of need out there, and there's been a lot of infrastructure deferral with school construction over of course, the school buildings lasted, ours were all 100 years old before we decided to replace them. And we were just throwing good money after bad. I mean, it was ridiculous. We were just wasting more money, not dealing with the situation. But I'm not insensitive to what you're talking about in terms of, the impact for the residents of the city of Holyoke.
We're going to start wrapping this up. Councilor Sullivan has a question.
Just one question and one comment. As far as the issue of the two schools at the same time also, and Dennis, if you'd like to weigh on this, go ahead. I don't want to be in the position of telling half the kids that you're going to get to go to a new school, and I've seen the plans for these schools, new state-of-the-art schools with wonderful facilities, and the other half aren't going to go. We're going to do this for everybody or nobody. That's how I look at it. All right? So that's one point I wanted to make. You want to throw anything in on Dennis, or did I?
No, that's exactly what it is. It is
Dennis, I was about to say, if anybody else would like to say anything, but please use the mic. You've been listening to us all evening, and Dennis is a member of our school committee 12 years now?
Has it been that long?
At least.
Something like that. All right. But yeah, that's exactly what it is. It's equity. I mean, you don't want one school so that half of our middle school students get to go to this great school and the other half stay in schools that are falling apart. We want equity. We have a chance to do something great in this city, and that great thing is to build these two new middle schools for all of our middle school students who are going into high school. And they deserve nothing less. They deserve the absolute best. We've been, for a long time, our students and our schools have been looked at under a microscope. We haven't been talked about favorably, and it isn't fair to the students at all. It wasn't fair to the teachers. It wasn't fair to the community, how we were portrayed in the media, as far as receivership goes and all of this stuff, and that our schools are no good. We have this great opportunity. We have great students that deserve it. I'll be one of the people that will have to pay extra taxes. And I want people to look at it not as extra taxes, but as an investment. When you look at it, it's less than $1 a day. You can give $1 to a panhandler every day, or you can, to a charity, you go to a Stop and Shop, Easter seals, whoever, every day. You know, and we can do this as a community come together, not just the city council, not just the state, not just the school committee, but as a community come together and pay that $1, less than $1 a day actually, and have these two great new middle schools for our students who deserve nothing less than the best. And that's where we are, and that's why we want two. Because not only half of the middle school students deserve it, but they all deserve it. And there are some good things that are happening now with the schools. And we have students who are putting it all out there. They're doing their very best. I'd like to see more of it put out there, showing, you know, what they're doing when they're getting to high school. The dual language program has been around even before receivership. It was started before that. We wanted to expand it afterwards. Dr. Wright came aboard and made sure that we expanded that. That's that's a great thing happening. That's bringing people back. And when they see these two new schools, they want to stay. They want to come back to the community. So that will help. And when you brought up that we've seen less than 2% growth, you know, we need growth in the community. And this will help. When they see these two new schools, it will be nothing but positive, nothing but positive. And to break a cycle of poverty, it begins with education. And we have to invest in our schools and in our students in order for that to happen. So the way that I see it, and I will vote yes for the debt exclusion, and I will be paying, and it's worth $1 a day for these two new schools to be here in the community. Thank you.
Thanks, Dennis.
Thank you, Dennis.
And Cinder, you're on the finance committee for the town of Swampscott also.
I am.
Is that an elected position? Do you have to
Oh,
be
it's
a member of the city
It's a
council?
volunteer. It's appointed by the moderator. Volunteer.
Volunteer? Would you like to volunteer to be on our finance committee?
If you were a little closer.
Despite the 2-hour drive, you're welcome anytime. Cinder, Abby, thank you for driving out. Thank you, everyone, Mayor, for participating, all the stakeholders for an evening of fact-finding and getting things out on the table. And we certainly know we got a timetable coming up, but we certainly know we have some future decisions to make. And we appreciate your help, and always. And for your 45 years of service to the city of Holyoke. Now, you know how I know it's 45?
Pardon? Oh, yeah.
45. I just celebrated our 45th high school reunion of 1973.
I just turned 45.
We weren't going to talk about that, you
It
know?
flew by.
So if the chair could just, entertain some motions, items 1, 3, and 4, if we could just say complied with.
Comply with.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? For our archives, table items 2 and 5. All those in favor? Any opposed? So moved. If we could just table items 6, 7, and 8. The police department cannot be here this evening. We'll get it back on our next agenda. And the Parks and Rec just found out this evening. They sent us some information, but I have questions, so I think we should schedule another meeting for that. On a motion to table 6, 7, and 8, all those in favor? Any opposed? So moved. If there's nothing else,
Motion adjourned.
motion to adjourn. All those in favor? Any opposed? We stand adjourned.